your organization should have a clear position. And probably would say, yeah, of course we have positioning. We have certain products, a certain key market, certain target audience, certain sales channels and marketing channels. Yes. And that's all fine. However, shouldn't your organization also have a position on public matters? And that's where it normally becomes utterly quiet. Politics, society, organization, are they interconnected? Yes or no? We have a debate, actually, which happens in Germany due to a massive incident that we had recently. Handelsblatt, one of the most important economic newspapers in the country, sent questionnaires to the 40 stock exchange listed companies in Germany. And the questionnaire was about politics. So do you actually set a clear limit against fascists, for example? Do you actually set a very clear line, draw a very clear line against far right-wing extremist parties? And, well, surprise, surprise, only 5 of these companies answered, which is, of course, a massive issue. The issue at the moment is the AfD, the Alternative für Deutschland, which is anything but an alternative. And that's a party which, according to court already, is in substantial parts of it safely far right-wing extremist. That does not mean conservative far right-wing, but far right-wing extremist. It's a far right-wing extremist party. And one of their members, Björn Höcke, is a Nazi, which was confirmed by court, and a fascist. Sorry for the tautology. You can't be one without the other. Well, you can't be a Nazi without being a fascist, obviously. So what to do now? And Harald Christ, who's a very well-known former board member of the Deutsche Bank, made a posting on LinkedIn and very clearly demanded that organizations position themselves against far right-wing extremist parties. And a massive discussion followed. And the question is, does your organization need a political debate? Does your organization need a political position? Do you have to make unambiguously clear where you stand when it comes to politics? And by the way, it's not only about Germany here. When you look into London right now, the annual Hanukkah menorah, which is always put up every year in December, will not be up there this year for, and I quote, due to community tension concerns. I'm going to have a comment on that in a minute. The question is, what should your organization do when it comes to politics? And let's face it, every organization has a clear position in discourse for a very simple reason. You cannot have any discourse without having a position. Organizations have very clear opinions on many aspects of the discourse, but become remarkably quiet on other issues. So very clearly, there are certain issues. First issue is leadership level. When you look at leaders and they say, well, political statements could harm my career, or they say something like, well, political statements could harm my organization because maybe we have some of these voters amongst our clients, or and that now we come to the third level, where the third part where they say, well, maybe some of our investors or people who hold our stocks are people who vote for this party. So I prefer to say nothing. Well, if you say, I don't do politics because of my career and a purely assumed damage to your organization, investors or stockholding people, then please remove anything which contains the word values from your website and public communications, because you clearly have no values, or you have very questionable values and clearly not the ones that you claim on your website. And by the way, if you don't make any position against, for example, fascism, you shouldn't be surprised that you most likely will be considered as someone who either secretly or openly supports them. And by the way, the problem escalates from there. When leaders do not make a clear case, a clear statement on the matter, employees probably will then say, well, and by the way, these employees then have the right to do so. When you don't have any position in politics, your employees have a right to neutrality as well. So I just give you a couple of examples. Let's say you have someone, you are a real estate company, and someone is part of the Berlin initiative, which we have in Berlin, Germany at the moment, to publicly disown large-sized real estate companies. You would probably say, well, you can't work for a real estate company and then claim that you want to have it state-driven disowned. Well, when you stay neutral on fascism, you have to stay neutral on your employees' point of view on that. And when someone, for example, works for a for-profit company but is secretly or openly communist, and you say, well, you can't be both. You can't say, I just make money from making a profit here and then be a communist. You work against our goals. You pretty much work against the goals of the company that pays your bills. Well, they have a right to neutrality. You stay neutral on the one, you have to stay neutral on the other, at least when you want to stay credible. If you then do not stay neutral, you lose any kind of credibility. And by the way, when these people I just mentioned, when these employees work well, they have a right to promotions and salary raises and career, at least if you like to stay credible. The worst person, however, the worst people, however, are the pseudo-position people. And the pseudo-position people are the ones that you immediately find the comment section below the post that Harald Christ made, where he clearly said German entrepreneurs and German stock exchange listed companies especially need to position themselves very clearly against a fascist far right-wing extremist party. And I made a comment. When you go on LinkedIn and you look at Harald Christ's profile, you see the post, you will also see that I made a comment there, and my comment is very clear position, very clear values. This is how it must be. No room for right-wing extremists. Sorry, that was my comment. And it didn't even take 2 hours until someone then commented just after my comment, where the person, the typical standard suit and tie picture on LinkedIn, you can probably now figure out what kind of comment is coming. And there's a person who is a regional VP, so not someone who is on a minor or very low position in the organization, a senior leader, a senior executive, states, the good thing about democracy is that you can make a statement, but you don't have to. That also applies to high-ranked managers. I commented below that the good thing about democracy is that the spineless people can be described as such and must be dealt with accordingly. We must deal with them accordingly, because silence is violence and passivity is complicity, which is, by the way, an obvious truth. So when you have people who claim they have a position, and let's say someone says we need to have a position against far right-wing extremists, and then you make a comment where you say, oh, people don't have to make a statement. What kind of political opinion might you have? Probably anyone will now assume that you voted or you support this party, which is, of course, abhorrent. And we all can have a bad day in the office. We all can make bad comments online, and then you just apologize, move on, delete the comment, say sorry, and then you move on from there. However, when you don't, people will assume that you have debatable political views, and that makes you unfit and unsuitable for office. It makes you unfit and unsuitable for any kind of position within the organization. And when you now claim, no, there is a right to neutrality because on a formal level, in a legal system, I have the right to abstain, then we can simply claim that you need to abstain on other topics as well. Let's say you're a car producing company, and well, if you want to have fuel driven engines or e-engines, just stay neutral, just say nothing. And surprisingly, people are very strongly opinionated on that. When someone, for example, in your organization forms a union and implements the right to strike, which means your company can't produce anything until you agreed on a new tariff, well, just stay neutral. They have a right to strike, don't they? Stay neutral. Oh, but certainly you will not stay neutral. What a surprise. When you lose money due to Brexit, and clearly it is now obvious, if you don't want to be considered a completely incompetent person, no one can support Brexit when you see what happened up to this point. When you lost business, just stay neutral. Just accept that you lost business and now the Europeans take the money and you just don't take the money. You see, you won't stay silent on that, rightfully so, but you can't stay neutral on the one and not neutral on the other. And I give you an example where this selective neutrality, and there's not selective neutrality, it is selective ignorance, happens again. Just today, when I record this podcast, the U17, the under-17 national team of Germany, became world champion in football. Soccer for our American listeners. And that was a surprise to many. It's the first time that Germany won the world champion title in this category, in this age category. And just to give you context of what's coming now, U17, under 17, these people are not even adults. By the way, I have to add that it takes quite something. We must have arrived at a very bad point in society when I now have to give praise to the German Football Association, which I would rarely do, but I have to do here. The under-17 national team on their Facebook profile had to block more than 60,000 people. And now you probably wonder why. Well, what do you think why? And the reason was pretty simple. obvious and blatant racism. Because there are still people out there who think that Germans can only be tall, blonde, and white-skinned people, probably pretty close to Nazis, probably pretty close to far right-wing extremes. And of course, that's not the case. We're an immigrant country with an immigrant society. And as we see, integration works way better in Germany than it does in many other countries. Still, it's far, far away from perfect, we have to say. However, it is a brilliant picture of how integration works when you see this team playing. And still, there are adults out there who yell comments publicly online to below 18-year-olds, and they just are abhorrently racist. That's where society has arrived. And I can tell you it's not going to be any better if we do not speak up against that. It is very surprising that when we become world champion, we suddenly celebrate being world champion, which is fair to do. Please celebrate these successes. But after that, we have to talk about the obvious problem of racism in society. And these are not people who are left behind. These are not people who have certain issues. And these are certainly not people who lack education, because the information you want is publicly available on the internet. When the internet has proven one thing, often the aspect and the problem is not a lack of education or the availability of information. Racists are racist because they are, drum roll, racist. What a surprise. And by the way, I do not want to exclude my industry here. The training, speaking, coaching industry probably is one of the worst examples of what you can see on the planet. If you talk to many trainers, speakers, and coaches, and just to be clear, there are no official trade bodies of these professions. Some people claim they are, none of them are. And you have seen homophobia, anti-Semitism. There's a proper plague of so-called speakers. Suddenly anyone is a speaker. Most of them can't make ends meet. If they try to do so, they live off the income that someone else makes in their household, or there's an inheritance from someone else who died before them. And we now have public TV presence of that, where, for example, in Germany, Reches Fernsehen or the WDR, a German TV station, publicly talks about the issue of speakers and what they do in their business models, ripping off people, selling hope, and talking nothing else than lies and nonsense, which, by the way, by certain speaking associations, was wildly supported. Which is an absolute disgrace. But any trainer, speaker, coach will tell you, oh, it's not a job, it's a calling. We can change the world. Speak up, speak your heart out. And when we had homophobia, racism, and anti-Semitism, suddenly all of them said absolutely nothing, because as long as the people in power in these associations didn't really agree on the matter, because they came from a certain generation and saw their own advantage first, then suddenly all these people became very, very silent. In my industry, I'm not popular, and I couldn't care less. Not being popular in speaking associations probably tells you in life that you're doing reasonably well and you still have some common sense left. When you look at that, my industry is one of the worst examples of them all. And by the way, talking about what we saw in London, when you do not put up the annual Hanukkah menorah, this is not community tensions. That is blatant, ravaging, and violent anti-Semitism. People want to kill Jewish people. Anti-Semites want to hurt and kill Jewish people. That's what it is. And shame on the London mayor, Sadiq Khan, for allowing this to happen, because that makes anti-Semitism suddenly being accepted in society. It's exactly the worst leadership fail of the whole year that we see here. Summing it all up, you need to have a position as an organization. If you don't, if you stay neutral selectively, you have no right to speak up against any action that your employees might take politically, even if it's against your own interest or your own organization. And you certainly do not want to have that. And please do not have the reflex that we always see. You have any kind of far right-wing extremism, and in an instant, someone makes a comment and says, oh, but there's left-wing extremism as well. Yes, and no one says that there's not. I give you the example because, for example, in the US or the UK, you don't even have any larger far left-wing parties left anymore. The Labour Party and the Democrats are mildly left-winged, if at all, when you look into the political spectrum. However, when you look into Germany, we have one of the stronger left-wing parties left. And let's look at both of the extremist parties. The AfD wants to get the voice removed from many minorities and even many women and many groups which they simply do not like in their white, male, straight, cisgender agenda that they have. And that is fascist. That goes against the foundations of society, that is inherently non-democratic. And you have a certain wing in the left-wing party that we have in Germany called Die Linke, which translates the left. They have a certain wing, 5 to 10% of them are communists. And that, of course, is against the state. However, 90% of the left-wing, far left-wing party is in for democratic socialism. And I tell you, I have no common ground with the far left-wing party and their big state, more regulation, high taxation kind of approach. However, we can discuss that as long as we keep on the ground of the democratic spectrum. When you say the far right-winged extremists and the far left-winged extremists are the same, the only thing you say is that you never look into the subject matter, you have no idea, you have no clue, and you embarrass yourself in public. So please distinguish when you, no matter in which country you are right now listening to this, please always look into these parties and look at what they want to do. Because there are extremist parties who are not always the same. However, when someone says we're going to remove the voice of certain people due to their skin color or their sexual orientation, I can tell you 80 to 90% of the emails I receive during this podcast, and after this podcast probably as well, I receive feedback on my podcast every single week, and criticism when people, I can already see it in the subject line when people write something like your woke podcast or lefty listen up. I'm a liberal with a tendency towards conservative politics, and suddenly I'm a lefty because I speak up for women or minorities. We simply see that often these people criticize nothing I said. They criticize They criticize that I'm gay, an openly gay man who speaks up for the rights that I have a right to have. And that's what they do not like. They pretty much say, oh, you can vote. What else do you want? It's just equal rights is just too much for you. Thank you. No, thank you. So you must have an unambiguously clear decision, an unambiguously clear position on politics. And when you say, oh, it's very difficult, we need to differentiate. Yes, we need to. And then please do. However, make your point, make it heard, because anything else, because you can't be selectively silent without losing all of your credibility. Anything else than having a very clear position against fascism is hypocrisy. And you do not want to be a leader and be called, described, and rightfully declared a hypocrite, because then you have no right to lead and your organization rightfully comes to an end. And now it's your call to decide where you stand. And of course, we have more on this and by the way, I just want to make unambiguously clear, I could never accept anyone for the AfD or any kind of supporter in my organization, and I never will. Also, I could never accept anyone from the left-wing party except when they have a reasonable approach, even when we disagree on taxation and regulation. When they are in somewhere in the moderate wing, I can disagree with them and still work with them, but I don't work with fascists, full stop. There is no common ground of negotiation. When you now say, hey, I have a couple of aspects I'd like to discuss, just drop me an email, nb@nb-networks.com, and then we take it from there. I will put the email address in and my LinkedIn contact as well in the show notes of this podcast. By the way, on LinkedIn, just connect with me properly. Don't follow, just properly connect. I'm always also looking forward to hearing your feedback. If you like to have anything very specific, so for example, you need someone for a training or a speaking or a coaching session or whatever else, consulting, etc., then just you can drop me an email as well. But we can also just talk about anything you like to discuss. Doesn't cost you a penny, and then we take it from there. The second step I always recommend is sign up for the leadership letter, because only on that leadership letter you get the information when we have our live Q&As. When you go to expert.nb-networks.com, you can see where you can register your email address. You only receive one email every Wednesday morning. You see all my articles, so access to my published articles, access to my podcast, and also when do we have the next live session, including how to access this live session. And the third step is apply, and that's the most important one. Apply what you heard in this podcast, because only when you apply what you heard on this podcast, you will see the positive change that you most likely want to have in your organization. I wish you all the best doing so. Thank you very much for listening. And at the end of this podcast, there's only one thing left for me to say. Contact me anytime if you like to have any help or discuss anything. And also, what I always say at the end of every podcast, thank you very much for your time.